Here we are recording now. Okay, start the audio recording. Okay, here we are. We are about to start the 11th parak of Mesilat Yesharim. This is, I'm almost positive, the longest parak in all of Mesilat Yesharim. And in the last parak, so he discussed the midah of Nikias. And when it comes to being nucky, so just one introductory word, which I said the last time, that this art scroll version that I have, they deliberately mentioned that they don't translate Nikias. They just transliterate it. And the reason is that even though one could say cleanliness, it said real Nikias to what it really means. It's not just cleanliness. Like, that doesn't do it justice. But when it comes to Nikias and being as just as one could be, and as vigilant and careful and as almost perfect, I'll say almost as perfect as one could be, to remove oneself from sin. So we spoke about like an introduction to that, and now we're going to be discussing the details. So we start, Prate Midas Hanikias Rabim Hemeod. There are many, many details to the midah of Nikias. And he says, Included in this are the details. It involves details to every single one of the mitzvahs lo taseh. And sorry about this, having technical difficulties. We are good. We're back on track. The mitzvahs lo taseh. Ki amnam inyan hamida kvar amarti. Because a person has to make sure to be nucky from every single one of the sins. Meaning we're not just focusing on one sin, but we're going to be focusing on wanting to be nucky, wanting to be as careful and clean, I guess, from every single sin. We spoke about last week just briefly about how, and this is not going to come up this week, but it's just important to know related to Nikias, spoke about how it's not just about like zihiras, which is knowing, let's say, the big things, the big sins, and to avoid all big sins, but it was being so careful even to the minute details of sins and making sure to yourself to not rationalize, not mess up in a sin by rationalizing that it's not really a sin. That's really what Nikias is in a nutshell. And it says, Ve'ulam, even though in general, of course, the Yetzer Hara works hard to get a person to sin related to any sin. However, he says there are certain sins that are more desirable to man. And therefore, there are certain sins where the Yetzer Hara works even harder to get us to rationalize to ourselves or to commit out of desire those specific sins. And I'll finish the sentence, then I'll give a little bit more elaboration. Therefore, a person requires greater chizuk to withstand these specific sins and the temptations that are encompassed by it. So some elaboration is, I think just for ourselves, it's so obvious that there are certain sins that are more tempting and certain sins that people stumble in more. So let's say simply when it comes to shatnez, it's one of the sins in the Torah. It's one of the chukim, but we don't necessarily, I don't think, have such a Yetzer Hara to wear wool and linen. So much so, where even if we find a suit that we want, if it says 50% wool, 50% linen on the tag, we wouldn't think like, oh, but come on, maybe it doesn't apply. Like, we'd be like, okay, this is shatnez. And yet for other things, for other averos, we have a much stronger desire. And of course, unfortunately, sometimes we're nichshal. Sometimes we're nichshal even when we know outright this is a big sin we're about to do. Sometimes we're nichshal by rationalizing that, this is not so bad. It's okay. And whatever it is we tell ourselves. And he's going to be focusing here on a few of these sins. The first one, I believe I know we're going to be focusing on Gezel. I'm trying to remember if he focuses on anything before discussing Gezel and theft. He It says, "B'chein amru zachron lebracha." It says in Gemara Chagig on Yud Alf and Beis, "Gazel v'arayos nafsho shel adam mechamdetan u'mis'ava lahen." That specifically, that when it comes to theft and when it comes to arayos, a person has a strong temptation for these things. And the footnote here that I have from ArtScroll, it says something very interesting. It says, this doesn't mean that a person actually craves the sins of theft and illicit relations. It means rather that one naturally desires money and physical gratification. So Gezel and Arayos are just the big components related to a desire for wealth, for money, and desire for physical pleasure, which is Arayos is the greatest of the physical pleasures, let's say. Obviously, people do have a desire for Gezel and Arayos. Certainly, might not be necessarily like have an affair, chasam, of like one of the big Arayos, but certainly, I think we're all aware of certain desires that people have, that we have at times. It says, "V'hine anachnu ro'im," that we see she'afal pi shelo rov b'nei ha'adam ganovim b'galoyim. We know, of course, that the average person is not going around stealing outright. It's not. Let's say I'm in a high school, so I'm in like that world all the time. So the average kid in high school is not going into someone else's locker and stealing their smartphone or stealing their lunch money. It's not what's going on. But just to say, you know what the average person does do? And I've spoken to my classes about this at times. They will go into someone else's locker and take a snack. Be like, oh, they would let me have it. Or they'll take like a pen or pencil. There are times where that is permitted. I remember when I was living with roommates in Washington Heights, I honestly forgot the exact example, but let's say it was like a drink from the fridge or something, or pens. It could be pens. I remember saying to my roommates, I remember one specific, could be I said to all of them, they're like, feel free, you always have permission to take. Like, you don't have to ask every time. And I would ask them if, like, there's something that I knew that they wouldn't mind, I would ask permission for life, basically. Like, is it okay if I use your pen whenever I want? Yeah, it's fine. And then I don't have to worry about that every time, because that is an example of small petty theft that a person doesn't really think about. He said that even though people aren't outright thieves, to take something, money, or an object of a friend's possession, bring it to your possession. Nonetheless, rubam tomim tam geneva b'masam matana b'mashiuru heter la'atvam listaker ish be'efsedo shel chaveru yomru l'arviach shane. He says, when it comes to business affairs, when it comes to business dealings, business transactions, people think business is business. People think that, I have to do this in order to get ahead, in order to be the top performer, in order to get a paycheck, in order to impress my boss. This is what's expected of me. What do you want from me? And sometimes people, unfortunately, have that mentality when it comes to certain things related to business. I mentioned last week that I'm in the process. This is pretty hush-hush. That's why I'm going to be recording this and disseminating this on White Torah. But this is, I know that like 3 people are going to listen to that, so it's not a big deal. But I'm in the process of starting a business right now. And I mentioned to you how I'm going to have a shaila of selling something, some item that could get purchased on Shabbos on a website. And I know I want the answer to be yes. I could still operate a website on Shabbos, and someone could still, in theory, purchase an item on Shabbos. So I'm very much nogeh b'davar, and I want a certain answer that to the average person, if someone wasn't running a business, if you were to ask me a year ago, can I sell an object on Shabbos? I would have been like, no, what do you mean? But now that I'm the one involved, it's like, I'm sure and I actually do think there probably is a heter for it. I'm not like so concerned. But when you're very much involved and you think like, I have to make a living, I can't run a website, right? There's certain things like that. I'm not sure, I'm almost positive that none of you are doctors, and I'm almost positive none of you are kohanim. But when it comes to a Kohen being a doctor, that is something that is pretty controversial, and many poskim hold that a Kohen can't be a doctor because a Kohen can't put themselves in a situation where they might be around a dead body, let alone going to medical school where you are around dead bodies at times and have to do certain like operations or whatever, maybe anatomy classes on cadavers. So a Kohen might say, what do you mean? So I can't be a doctor? And someone else would say, yeah, that's exactly what it means. That's exactly what we're saying. So it's yes, Ami. I know, like I said, before I answer a question, I will say I know that is controversial. I'm sure there are poskim who say that it is permitted. One could say maybe pikuach nefesh. We can't have no Jews who are doctors, whatever it may be. But I do know, I'm 99% sure that Rav Shechter holds that a Kohen cannot go to medical school. Ami, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I guess I just thought it was like a meis shel mitzvah almost, right? That for a meis shel mitzvah, Kohen's allowed to become tameh. So if he's a doctor, I almost thought that that's like a meis mitzvah, but maybe not.
So I think when it comes to meis mitzvah, we hold that a person, even a Kohen, like you're saying, even the Kohen Gadol, is able to be metameh themselves. And the reason is we have such care for human life that even for a human body, once a person dies, we have so much care to bury the body right away. And it's referring to a time, in general, I think, when like the Kohen is the one who sees the body, not where you're in a room or you're in a hospital and there are 100 people around and anyone could do the job. And you say, I'm the Kohen, let me do it. Typically speaking, we, like when it comes to, let's say, violating Shabbos. So if there's a case of serious pikuach nefesh, the halacha is that actually the rabbi should be the one to violate Shabbos, because he should show people that don't hesitate and you should break Shabbos. But if there's room where it's not impending danger, and it is a case where Shabbos has to be violated, but it doesn't have to be done in the moment, then the halacha is you should get ideally a non-Jew to be the one to do that. So over here, where many non-Kohen Jews could become doctors, so I assume that is, I don't want to say the general psak because I'm not positive it's the general psak, but according to the opinion that says it's usher, that's what they would say. There are plenty of Jews to be doctors. You should just choose a different profession, right? Let's say I happen to I enjoy playing golf. I love golf. Played yesterday. It's a good round, and I am certainly not on the caliber for the PGA Tour. I'm not even close. But if in theory I was good enough, then I still wouldn't be able to because they play on Shabbos. So I wouldn't say, oh, but what do you mean? But like, I'm not supposed to make a living. I'm not supposed to earn parnasa. I'm supposed to be ostracized because of this. There have to be some heterim. And I have students who have been very big soccer players. One in mind who was recruited for college, and he was on a traveling soccer team that played on Shabbos. He wasn't at the point of like not playing soccer on Shabbos, but he was at the point where he traveled to the place and stayed there for Shabbos, and then walked to wherever the game was. I know I'm getting very off field right now. Ami, yes, your hand is still up. Or is that something else? Oh, it says lower hand. Sorry.
I just don't know how to put it back down.
Okay, no problem. I don't even know how to raise my hand on Zoom, so you're ahead of me. I guess as a teacher, I'd never have to raise my hand, so it hasn't been an issue for me really. Okay. Continuing on, the ulam. So he says, the ulam, lavim harbe nemru begazal. There are many sins related to gezel, related to theft. So he's saying, just to recap a little bit, that theft and aras are two big sins that a person has a greater netiya, greater inclination to violate. And he's not necessarily talking specifically about like having an affair and going up to someone and stealing money or their iPhone, but a lot of things are involved within the general category of arouse of general pleasure that could be forbidden and general desire for money that could push away one's thoughts to rationalize certain things that might not be as permitted as as really are. It says, there are many sins that are involved within Gezel. Lo ta'asok, don't cheat. Lo tigzol, don't steal. Lo tignuva, don't steal. Lo t'chachashu, don't deny falsely. Lo t'shakru, ish b'miso, that you shouldn't speak sheker, you shouldn't speak falsehood one person to another. Lo sonu ish es achiv, you shouldn't aggrieve one person to another. Lo tasik gvul re'echa, hasagas gvul, of encroaching on another person's business, opening up one similar store to another where that's not allowed. There are certain cases where that is permissible. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that TNEC's policy is that since there are so many Jews here, so if someone decides, there are already 3 pizza stores, but I want to open a 4th, that I think in certain cases that would not necessarily even fall into hasagas gvul, of encroaching on another person's business. But obviously there are many times where that would be hasagas gvul, and Beis Din has to be consulted on those matters. So he says, "Hein kol ila chiluke dinim shebegazel," and within these things there are so many details related to gezel. Kol masim rabim min hamasim hanasim bechlal hamasav amatan hamedinim. That there's so many actions that are encompassed within this that are related to like standard business dealings that go on, right? So many. I think he's saying that there's so many types of theft on lower levels that could occur during business dealings. And each and every one of them could be a great sin. Kilo hamasa hanikar umefursam be'oshek v'gazel hu levado aser. Ella kolsha sof yagir la bigramoso kvar hu bechlal ha'isr. He's saying anything that even leads a person to theft is a sin. Not just, doesn't have to be outright cheating, but if eventually that's what's going to be happening from starting off small and building up, then that itself could be a sin. The Al Inyan Zeh Amr Zechron L'Vrachan, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Pei Al Cham and Aleph, the Chamim say, Ves Eishes Re'ehu Lo Timeh, that you shouldn't be, basically you shouldn't sleep with your friend's wife. And this is explained, so Lo Yara Lu Manus Chaviro. So the Gemara explains that pasuk in Yecheskel to mean they shouldn't encroach on your friend's business. And Yecheskel over here, here it's brought down like the footnote here explains what's going on. Yecheskel discusses someone who's a righteous man as someone who doesn't defile his fellow's wife. Now, firstly, I mean, he doesn't even address it here, but on an obvious note, that doesn't seem like someone who's so righteous. I think the average person hopefully doesn't defile their friend's wife. But he's saying it's not literally about defiling one's friend's wife. It is about not encroaching on someone else's business and having honest business dealings. And he says that is considered a righteous person because there's so many improper rationalizations that a person will tell themselves and so many potential pitfalls that could lead to real sins of gezel, even if it's not outright gezel that you would think is prohibited, but there are many other prohibitions that this is a righteous person, someone that doesn't encroach on someone else's business in any way. Kfar Haya Rabbi Huda Oser L'chenvani Shalo Yachale Klayos Vegozim Metinokos LaHargilan Shiavo Etzlav. That Rabbi Yehuda prohibited storekeepers to basically lure and tempt kids to come and have them and their parents come shop in their store by offering them treats. Here the treats were nuts. I don't know how many kids will like give them a pistachio or a cashew and they'd be like, wow, I want to come and come to your store. Wow, this is great. But the idea of not wanting to tempt someone with something like that. And Rabbi Huda says that's prohibited. And the Chachamim say that's permitted. And he continues, The Chachamim only permitted this to be done if the other storekeepers are able to do the same. So as long as it's an even playing field. I remember when I was in YU, I don't know what the policy is now, but when I was in YU, and one of the best days was student election day, because when it was election day for students, for the student council, every person on the student council was allowed to spend up to $100. And you know what people spent for $100 to try to get people to vote for them? Food. That's exactly what they did. You'd walk down Amsterdam Avenue, somebody like, you want Entenmann? Vote for Hirsch. You want whatever? Vote for that. You didn't have to buy lunch that day. You were good. It also shows this, in general, I think about this in politics as well, where the people that are able to run for president, and this is not about, I'm not picking a side. I don't think you'll get from my statement whether I'm Republican or Democrat, but it's just interesting how even the people who are only able to run, and obviously the people who are able to win, are people oftentimes who have the most money for their campaign, to have the most advertisements, and have the biggest team. And that's why, like I said, it's not a political statement, but that's one of the reasons why, like, Bloomberg towards earlier in the year, Bloomberg was like, part of me wants to say billions of dollars, but that might be ignorant because we might have billions of dollars. So everyone's funny, yes, I'm saying you need a lot of money to be able to have a campaign. And it's like, seems pretty foolish that when you're having something like politics where it should be about your values, that a lot of times people are subconsciously mostly, but swayed based on other things that are going on. Just like, oh, this is what I see. Here's the ad that's in front of me. Okay, enough politics out of me. You will almost never hear me talk about politics. I don't count that as really talking about politics. You know what I mean? The Amr Zachron Levracha, and says in Bav Bashan Pei Chadam Beis Kasha Gezel Hediot Mi Gezel Gavoha. That Gemara says that stealing from a common person is more severe than stealing from a common person is more severe than stealing from the Beis Hamikdash property. It's pretty intense. It doesn't continue with this. There's a long footnote here that explains that the words sin and treachery are used in the psukim that discuss both of those things, stealing from a person and stealing from the Beis Hamikdash. When it comes to stealing from a person, it mentions the word sin first and then treachery. And when it comes to by the Beis Hamikdash, it mentions treachery first and then sin. And the difference, he explained, is that when it comes to stealing from the Beis Hamikdash, the fact that it says it is treachery and then only later is a sin is because you only violate it once you get benefit from it. When you steal from a person, it mentions sin first and then treachery, because once you steal from it, even before you derive benefit, that is an avera right there already, or it's a higher avera. I'm sure it's an avera steal from the Beis Hamikdash even if you don't get benefit, but it'd be a higher avera then. Continuing on, Kvar patru et hapoalim ha'usim etal balabayis min birkat hamotzi and birkat acharono de birkat hamazon. When I was preparing and reviewing this I was going to say this parak, but the parak, as we discussed, we're going to spend months on. So as I was reviewing this section of the parak earlier today to prepare, so this is the first thing that came to my mind, actually last night when I started preparing, about the topic of Gezel, being so careful with theft. Is the Gemara in Brachos on Tef Zayin Amud Aleph discusses how a worker, and in the time of the Gemara, how a worker was patur from saying a bracha rishona, and how they had an abridged version of benching anytime they had bread. And so it seems a very intense thing. And the reason is that here they are, they're contractual workers who have to work, let's say 9 to 5, I'll just make up that time. And every single minute that they're of that day is to their boss, is to the person who hired them. And therefore, how could they take time away from their employment to daven to Hashem, to say praise to Hashem, when here they are, they have a contract, they have to work for this. And it's so intense that they're patur from mitzvos derabanan. They don't have to say a bracha beforehand. And only for mitzvah deoraita, like benching, are they able to do, and they did that even in an abridged fashion. So very intense stuff. Nowadays happens to be it is assumed, there is a general assumption that people are allowed to take breaks. And that's why people are able to take a break for mincha. You get a lunch break. Sometimes a lunch break is built into the contract anyway. But it's understandable that a person's able to take a break. Even within that, though, I think a person within this whole parak in mind that we're seeing now, it is important to be conscious of if you are a person who gets paid by the hour, however much work you're able to accomplish, if you're on within in that field where that's your requirements, that's your contract, then it is important to be conscious of how much you are not working throughout the day. Like I said, you're able to take time off, but check things online for an hour or two probably is not appropriate. Continuing on, and even when it came to Kriyat Shema, which is a mitzvah deraisa, they only permitted them to say Kriyat Shema for the first paragraph, and they're patur from saying the second or third because they wanted them to work for the person who they're supposed to work for, and they have to keep up to their contract. Kal v'chomer b'menoshal kal v'chomer de'bereshus. He says, how much more so, therefore, do we have to be careful when it comes to things that are optional? If over here, when it comes to things that are obligated to Hashem, like davening, like benching, like saying Kriya Shema, whatever. So for those things, if they minimized it to such a small point where we're able to say only a small amount, then for something that is just optional, then imagine how much even more careful we have to be. That's prohibited because you have to realize that you're working for the Baal Habayis. And if you violate this, so this is Gezel. So when we started and we were saying that the idea of Gezel, so this I think is one of the most relevant points, that the average person is not going into someone else's stuff and stealing their wallet, but this is a form of Gezel as well when it comes to just taking time away from one's employment. Hine Abba Chilkia afilu shalom lo heshiv l'tamidei chachamim shenatan lo shalom shalo libata melechas re'ehud. The Gemara in Tanis Akaf Gimel Amud Beis says that Abba Chilkia wouldn't even respond shalom when the other Tamidei Chachamim would walk by, because he wanted to make sure I'm working. I can't stop even for a moment to say shalom. And over here, the footnote points out that the Gemara goes on there to say and discuss how when there was a drought and they would fast and they would daven to Hashem, that the Gemara says that the salvation for the drought came from the tefillah of this person, of Abba Chilkia. And the Gemara there also notes that it actually, someone here, the footnote mentions, this is not from that Gemara, this is an insight into that Gemara, that it doesn't mention his Torah learning. It mentions in the Gemara his honesty and his integrity. And therefore it says that the whole reason his tefillos were answered and the drought stopped was not because he's a huge Talmid Chacham, but was because of his midos and his honesty when it comes to business dealings. Stephen Lowinger is calling me. Stephen, shalom. I'm actually giving a Mesilat Yesharim shiur right now, and I will call you back very soon. Okay. I normally would not pick up in a shiur, but I figure because it's probably shul related, and this is a shiur for the shul, I figure maybe I'll pick up and just let him know what's going on. So, Shaloli Baltam Lachasreo. Yaakov Avinu levashal memvar b'fiv v'omer Yaakov. Yaakov said, Hayisi vayom achalani chorev v'kerach balayla v'tidad shnasi me'inai. The Yaakov worked for Lavan for many, many years, right? And throughout those, certainly the first 14 years when he was working for for Rachel and Leah, really working for Rachel for all 14. It was just supposed to be 7 for her, but then he was tricked, and then another 7 years for her. So, I apologize. I was on the wrong part. I apologize, please. So, Yaakov was extremely, extremely honest related to his business dealings with Laban. This is not even what it's quoting from. The part when it came to, like, it's always fun to look in the art scroll of, like, the speckled, dabbled, and all those different types of goat and sheep and cattle that he had. He says, like, I'll take the brown ones, you have these ones, I'll take the spotted ones, you have the speckled ones, whatever, all that back and forth. And Yaakov, even though Laban changed the terms, Rashi says, I think 100 times, then nonetheless, Yaakov was honest every single time. So this is not what it's quoting. It's quoting the part that Yaakov worked day and night. He worked in the day, the post says, in the heat of the day and during the frost at night, and his eyes were drifting. He worked like crazy. And he had a term, he had a condition, he had to deal with Laban. I will work for you. And therefore, he was very serious about the work. He says, like, what's a person going to answer someone who's not doing this and someone who's being dishonest when it comes to their business dealings? And klal shel davar hasachar etel chaver le'eza malacha shetiyeh. That the sum of the matter, general rule is that when it comes to a paid employment, that a person works for the worker, that their hours of employment are for that time. That's like a rental concept, that a rental is tantamount to a sale for the day of the rental. But here you are, like, here's your day to work for this person. You have to be as honest as possible. And whenever you take of the time they're supposed to be working for this person for your own pleasure, however it is, Eino ela gasal gomer. That's gezel gomer, he says. I'm just going to say another reminder that nowadays we hold you do have some time for yourselves, but a person shouldn't take that too loosely. A person shouldn't be so makel with that. A person should still try their best to be as honest and as diligent in their work as they could be. Bim lo machalo, eno machal. And if the person's boss, let's say they feel bad, they regret what they did. Let's say they don't ask for tshuva, or they don't ask for mechila, they don't ask forgiveness from their boss for what they did, or they ask forgiveness but it's not granted. Eno machal, Hashem's not going to forgive you. Shekvar amru b'seim zachron levracha, because the Gemara in Yoma and Pei Heyam Beis says, "Aver sheben adam l'chavero ein yom kippur mechaper ad shiratzas chavero." That when it comes to sins from person to person, so Yom Kippur is Hashem doesn't even forgive you on Yom Kippur unless you get forgiveness from the person themselves. But here, if a person is stealing the time from his boss because he should be doing X and he did Y, then it's not going to work. Right now, as I mentioned, I'm in the process of starting a business. So just I've been using something called Upwork, which is a freelance company. A number of months ago, I already hired graphic designers, and it's actually very cool because so you pay them hourly. And I remember thinking, like, okay, I'll trust them. Obviously, they'll say how many hours they worked, but there's a feature where it actually takes a picture every 10 minutes of the work that they're doing to show you the progress they're making. So that if you see that they're not making progress, then you know they're not working. I just hired someone for a job, not a graphic designer, but I hired someone for a job where it's a set price. So in that case, where it's a set price, and let's say it'll be 3 weeks for it to get done, so they could choose to take however much time they want, as long as they still get the job done. But this is regarding what we're saying, regarding someone who has a set salary, an hourly salary, basically, for what they do. I think it's probably Let me see. I think we'll probably stop here. We had an over. Typically we're around half an hour at 35.